I'm Zach Coleman of True Brewing, and this is the Brewer to Brewer podcast from All About Beer. My guest is Christopher Schooley of Troubadour Maltings, and he's here for a conversation that goes beyond the brew house and into topics that matter to brewing professionals and curious beer drinkers. First, please visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media at allaboutbeer. And to support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We'll get into the conversation in just a moment, but first, this message.
First Tea is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. First Tea offers more than tea, bringing herbs and botanicals from across the globe to your doorstep. Be it flower, root, or leaf, contact First Tea to find colorful, fragrant, and flavorful botanicals. Email info@firsttea, that's FIRSDTEA.com to find out more.
For more than a decade, the Beer Law Center has been dedicated to the craft beverage industry, meeting the legal needs of breweries, wineries, distilleries, and all manner of alcohol producers and sellers around the country. From company formation to federal and state licensing, trademarks, regulations, and compliance, or if you're buying or selling an alcohol business, the Beer Law Center should be your first call. The firm never charges for an initial consultation, and if they can't help you, they'll help you find someone that can. Have a legal question? Contact the Beer Law Center on social media at Beer Law Center and online at beerlawcenter.com.
Ironheart Canning is the quality leader in mobile canning and much more. With a decade of packaging experience, Ironheart is your turnkey solution for all your canning needs. Ironheart has no minimums on their mobile service, great supply chain quality control like no other, as well as technical support programs. Need canning materials? Ironheart has you covered with cans by the pallet or the trailer load, Pactex case trays, and can ends as well. Ironheart Canning. You have the capability because Ironheart can do it for you. Visit them at ironheartcanning.com or email info@ironheartcanning.com.
Malteurop Malting Company is based in North America, specializing in growing and producing quality malts for the craft beer and distilling industries. With local farms and malt houses spread across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, MMC's commitment to excellence is fully ingrained into every batch it produces, ensuring breweries and distilleries of any size can create the finest beverages on the planet. Visit malteuropmaltingco.com to learn how Malteurop can support your malting needs. Or you can contact them at customer success@malteurop.com or call 844-546-MALT for questions or to place your order. Malteurop, premium grains from field to flavor.
Okay, let's get into it. A bit about my guest today. Christopher Schooley founded Troubadour Maltings in Fort Collins, Colorado with Steve Clark in 2014 after an 18-year career in specialty coffee. Working primarily in the roasting and importing sectors of that industry, he developed a passion for production and raw materials. Learning about and visiting where they came from, why that's important, and then in sharing those stories and how they impacted the quality of the product. After a number of collaborations with the craft beer industry, Schooley and Clark saw a unique opportunity to create something special in that particular supply chain and to tie everyone in it together in a meaningful and invigorating way. The Troubadour mission from day one has been to produce unique character-driven malts that inspire creativity in those who use them. Troubadour has been in full production since April 2015 and works with breweries, distilleries, and bakers all over Colorado and throughout the country. Chris, welcome to the Sonic Stammtisch that is Brewer to Brewer. I'm so happy to be talking to you today. You know I respect the hell out of you and always love when we get a chance to talk. I think you got a lot of valuable things to say about the beer industry and just most things in general. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Zach. No, this is super cool. I'm so glad you reached out to me to do this. Like from day one, since the first time we met, I feel like we really just clicked on not just brewing topics and whatnot, but able to really get into some things and off on some side roads on those those subjects for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like we hit it off right away and just had like very similar approaches to what we wanted to do in life and business, and which is a perfect segue into talking about those things. So I'm kind of thinking about this, our conversation of like in two parts. I feel like we can have like
Yeah.
a broader, more conceptual half of the conversation, and then here in a bit, maybe we can shift a little bit into like a more specific conversation that dives into maybe some more practical things for brewers or maltsters even, or maybe it's not even that specific, but we could try to uh, maybe talk about a little bit less heady stuff, get into some of the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
Although, if anybody listened to the episode of me and Tim, you have no doubts that can talk for a long time just about the heady stuff. But so
No surprises there.
yeah. So one thing that was immediately clear in meeting and chatting is the importance of ingredients. I know it's central and it seems so obvious, but kind of like the foundational aspect of an ingredient and diving into that and exploring what that means is something that has been a focus for me at True, and obviously that's been important to you guys with Troubadour. So I just want to talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember when I first sat down with you guys, you and Nick, um, back in the day, and dropping in with some samples, and we had kind of been exchanging some emails and whatnot, but finally got together. And you guys kind of, before I could even say anything, you guys were like, "This is kind of what we are looking for. We would really like to partner with somebody and work with them more on where this stuff is coming from, and really be able to get into it and better understand it." And it was like, oh well, that was my pitch that you just gave. So like that worked out beautifully. Um, but really, I mean, getting back down to it, the things that always resonated for me. I mean, I'm sure I've mentioned this plenty of times in other conversations or whatnot, but just I just remember so clearly watching Mr. Rogers go to the Crayola crayon factory, and
Mm-hmm.
and just the impact of seeing that being like, oh, here's this creative tool, the crayon, right? Even as a 3, 4, 5 year old seeing that happen, it wasn't lost on me that like, oh, I use a crayon to make something, but somebody has to make it first in order for me to make that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And just always being fascinated, all those kids shows going into, the trumpet factory or saxophones or whatnot. And I mean, it's no surprise to me that, I mean, as personable as a person I am, and like as much as I like to work with people and communicate, and I've always loved service and working within service, like whenever I ended up in the back of the house somewhere in production, it just like felt like home, and it's one of those things too, like throughout the rest of my life, even when I've like either rose up through the ranks at a company, either with, coffee roasting or my importing days or whatnot, where I was doing less of the day to day, making of things and started doing more just, logistics and spreadsheets and things like that, like how much I missed the actual making of a thing and being able to get my hands dirty and just how rewarding that is at the end of the day. Like no matter, I feel like it's something that's always been kind of like the factory life is something that's always been presented in popular culture as this like punching out widgets and you're just a cog in a machine, cranking a lever or whatever, going through the motions. But for me, it's always been like so meditated. It's where I get into that third space where I'm like, I'm in a rhythm with something. I'm feeling literally productive, making, but I'm trying to be accurate and precise, but fast and moving all through that. Um, and it's when I'm in that mode where like that other creative space for me really opens up too, versus like, oh, I'm sitting down in front of a computer, I'm sitting down with my guitar or whatever. Now it's time to be creative. Like That's so
Hmm.
much more like stunting than just like, oh, I'm actively in this mode of trying to get through this production day. And now like all these things are coming to me because I can like just, really settle into it,
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely relate to that. I just got an idea for a new beer the other day, doing something completely different, but like physically, strenuous, and it kind of like turned my brain off of like a certain loop that I was in, and I was just free associating things all of a sudden and had this,
I
concept come to me. So it's
know.
yeah,
The real trick of that, right, is like being able to capture those in real time without like
yeah.
disrupting the flow. And so I feel like that's always been the challenge, but it's not like, you know, it has to be super disruptive. I think you also just kind of get trained into it and you can get, lock into that headspace pretty easily. But
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, totally. Well, let's talk about some of the things specific to ingredient sourcing. And
yeah,
I know it's not really related to that, but I just, since we're kicking off talking about ingredients, I want to keep on that thread a little bit. And maybe
sure.
like, I don't know how much you feel like there's crossover from, coffee days as far as kind of the experience goes there to, maltster days now.
Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, that's really one of the big light bulb moments for me when I started thinking about malting was, you know, one of the big things with coffee was in the last, 30 plus years now, just so much work has been put into closing or like really binding those links in that whole supply chain, really understanding where all the important import factors, were impact factors on quality and whatnot. Not that long ago, you know, coffee, like many, large scale industrial agricultural products, the grower grew a product. It was generally graded at harvest, and then it was siphoned into a big pile with everything else and sold as like generic grade A or B or whatever. Different areas had different ways to kind of designate that and whatnot.
Mhm.
Strictly high grown being one of those common phrases that maybe you've heard other places. Some places talk more about the density. Some of it was maybe more like numerical codes and things like that, or letter codes
Yeah.
like in of Kenya and things like that. Um, but there wasn't really a whole lot of extra effort put into that transparency post, the processing plant and the exporter. And when especially coffee started really trying to dig deep into that, part of what led to that was, pricing, um, prices and shortfalls in production and all these small companies just realizing like, oh, we don't have to necessarily go through these same, traditional pathways. We can actually go down there and try to set up our own kind of pathways to this, or at least create more of a relationship here to, a lot of it just stemmed from wanting to better understand it. And
Hmm.
that that kind of search to just better understand the thing just led to creating kind of these new pathways to kind of get it to the marketplace. But going down there, not just going to the plant itself, but going all the way back to the farm, understanding, the genetics, like the different varieties of coffee that were being grown in different areas and when they were harvested, how they were graded and whatnot. And now to this point, 30 plus years on from that, you walk into even a big market, brand name coffee place and you'll find a bag of coffee with the name of the farm and the altitude that it was grown at and the variety of coffee it was and whatnot. And
Yeah.
it's completely changed that, not just what's possible in that area with quality and exotic flavors or whatnot, but it's completely changed the consumer response to that and the consumer understanding and where the coffee drinker puts understands that value and all those things. So, coming back around to malt, I, I was working for the Specialty Coffee Association, doing a lot of community design or community outreach projects, a lot of experience design, sensory kind of exercises, getting people together just to taste things, and doing a lot of collaborations with brewing. And, just I had family that had grown barley for cores growing up. That's something I knew that we did here in Colorado. And so just started asking the brewers that we were collaborating with at the time, like, well, what do your relationships look like with your farmers? Like, that's something we're doing a lot of in coffee here. And what does that look like in this space? And, most of the brewers I talked to at the time were just, like looked at me with blank stares, like, what are you talking about? Like, and it just really came down to, who's growing this for you and where is it grown? And, it wasn't that the brewers didn't want to know that. It's just that there wasn't really necessarily a mechanism set up for it. It was being done the same way coffee was being done so long ago, grown at scale and everything done at such a scale that there's not really space for, not as much space there for transparency, because there's so much, homogenization of the product going on too, blending of different crop years, and just blending different areas together. So being able to break it down to the variety in and of itself was so beyond the point, because everything was so much of a hodgepodge to begin with. So really just saw that opportunity to try to start, making these inroads and trying to create these pathways. And, really led by that idea that the more that the end user knows about the thing and where it comes from and what impacts that, the more they're going to be able to do with it.
Yeah, I guess like what is the value there?
I mean, that value is in, I think it's multi-layered. It's not just,
that's why I asked.
yeah, it's not just the quality in and of itself. It's not just the knowing of the thing or being able to do, oh, I'm going to use this in this way in the brew house. Like, that value goes down to, pricing impacts and whatnot, and investing in the acreage, in a place like northern Colorado, in the first place. Like, this is something, when it's handled in this commodity kind of fashion, in this large scale industrial kind of fashion. And this isn't to say that, that's the wrong way to do it. It's the diversification of that really makes the difference. It's saying that there's, a way to split this up so there's different buckets to fill in all of this. But you get to have better conversations about, how the pricing is structured, and so that farmers can compete. It's profitable for the growers to grow it in the first place and to hold on to that acreage versus that acreage being developed into, new houses or Buc-ee's, gas stations in the case of here in northern Colorado or something like that. But it's also impacts like, oh, these are the varieties we want to grow here. Now we can, now that I'm an active participant in it as a brewer, or I'm at least engaged in the participation of it with the maltster I'm working closely with, we can have a more active conversation about, these are the varieties that are doing well right now in this area, not just flavor wise, but yield wise and ecologically, like they're made to grow in this area really well, bred to grow in this area really well, rather than just the new sexy variety that we're planting here because it has a name to it. We're finding things to plant here that are going to produce well, and all the way up through to the end user, from the grower to the maltster to the brewer. But as those also, the other side of that value is when we are faced with challenges, because we're not just lining up ones and zeros, in a microchip or whatnot. This is all organic material at the whims of the seasons and climate, impacts and rapidly changing climate impacts and whatnot. We can also be fully, engaged in making those adjustments, at each level, uh, in the field, understanding, how much water we have access to and what that's going to mean if we end up having more stress on that crop at the end of the year, what we're going to do in the malt house to, try to counter that and still get a really good quality malt out of it. But also, then we pass that on to you, the end user, to say like, hey, this is still really good malt. It might not traditionally fall into all the spec, that you've been taught on the COA specifically, but
Right.
we've been able to do this in the malt house. So now if you do this in the brew house, we're still going to end up with an amazing beer, not just a passable beer, but a really incredible beer that has lots of character and flavor to it. So
Yeah, I know, speaking for myself, it's like just what you're talking about, that kind of investment in what is going on agriculturally in your community, um, with your ingredients, and understanding that this isn't, I mean, so much of food and, is just based on commodity pricing and kind of processing, and it doesn't paint the picture of what is actually happening, to get that to us as brewers. There's no real understanding of what ingredients are around us and what that means. And I think as a brewer, we should be invested in our ingredients and understand what's going on with them, and understanding what's going on in our community, especially if we care about the community that we're in and we want to invest in it and try to make it a better place, and care about it. And we want to have a nice side benefit of the beers having terroir and representing where they're from. I think there's so many, things that are valuable to kind of digging into this, outside of
yeah,
just some kind of like basic ethical and, ideological things that I would say are important to True specifically. I think there's just some broad things that are worth thinking about.
yeah, no, and it's really it's both small and large on that scale, like I was saying, I don't think it's not about like flipping a switch and now you only use this kind of thing. Like, I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
that's realistic for everybody, but for, a certain kind of brewery or a certain size of brewery, it really can make sense, like, um and obviously, we start talking about price or things like that, like generally using a craft maltster, um, traditionally you're going to be paying a higher price for that raw material. Um, but again, it's part of a value exchange. Like, what am I getting from this? Not just the sense of well being or whatnot, but ultimately you should be getting this access to something that gives you even more. That's more unique. Unlocks a lot more kind of capabilities for you and whatnot.
I Yeah, I mean, I think maybe let's come back to that here in a second, because I think
Yeah, yeah,
that's a
yeah,
great
totally,
great jumping off point to some of the things that I think, like some real benefits, some practical benefits to, from my perspective, working with a maltster and working more directly with ingredients. From some of the things that we've been able to do, but also just like some of the stuff that Troubadour has
totally,
done in general, for the beer scene in Colorado. I think there's some unprecedented stuff and some really cool um, things that wouldn't exist otherwise. I Part of like the thing that I always think about is like, you know, you're you're kind of like, when you're as a brewer, you're almost like handed, the Country Malt or BSG catalog, and going, okay, here's what you can use to make beer, and which is a lot of great options. So, to take nothing
totally.
away from what is there, because obviously we still use some of those things, of course. It's just to say that, like, immediately my brain was like, this can't be this can't be all there is. Like I have all these crazy ideas, and I want to be able to do them, and I don't want to be limited by what's on a list. It's the same way, like if I'm putting a beer together, I almost never think about the style, which I don't know if that probably works against us in some ways, because that tends to set expectations in a bad way. But I'm always thinking about the final beer concept and flavor first, and then like back figuring how to get to that. And I don't really think about style, but I think working with suppliers directly opens the door to do more things, gives brewers more options. And
It's that, yeah.
yeah, no, please.
It's that customization kind of piece. It's
Yeah.
kind of like back when I was playing music in Chicago. Um, I I never had a ton of money, to buy the best equipment out there, or the stuff that was perceived as like you have to have this, X, Y, and Z amp and this guitar and this kind of thing. Um, so I, prided myself early on just finding things that had their own unique qualities, that were accessible to me, and building up
Hmm.
on that. And I remember playing, you know, the singer that was in this band that I played with, he was always trying to get me to use. We played with his brother's band a bunch, and his brother's band had, the giant orange stacks, and
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
all the big stuff, which is super. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, like, super cool to stand in front of that and just crank it up and whatnot. Um,
Hmm.
but I had my little, 1957 Magnatone Troubadour amplifier that I'd found from this guy who sold blue jeans next to the cafe I worked with. Sold blue jeans, and weed, and started his day at like 1 o'clock, and also
Yeah,
vintage.
yeah.
JR was his name, and I'd go and hang out with him on breaks and talk with him, and he showed me this amp, and it had this built-in golden voice vibrato in it, and it's one little 12-inch Celestion speaker, but with that vibrato built into it and the warm tube sound, um, and plugging in my cheap like Korean Les Paul copy through like I
Hmm.
had a tube screamer and a digi delay or whatever. I could make the weirdest sounds off of that, which I wasn't like trying to make the sound that I had heard on this or that record, or seen, heard at this or that concert, or the guy standing in front of the orange stacks or whatever. I was trying to find a new sound to make, to your point of, making this idea in my head. Like, I didn't think
Hmm.
I was going to get there by just buying the stuff out of the catalog that I was told I was supposed to use. Like, I had to go and assemble that thing, that rig
Yeah.
myself to try to create that whole thing. And so, I mean, I think I bring that up just because it's kind of that whole full circle thing of like looking for that unique thing that like, it's a completely Western idea to think that there's anything completely original 100%,
Hmm.
obviously there's influence and the impact of all these things um, attached to it, but to still configure all of that in such a way that it sounds fresh and exciting and different than everything else, or to carry the metaphor all the way through, it tastes fresh and exciting and different from everything else, or that it represents this thing close enough, but in a way that it's uniquely in and of itself. Like
Yeah.
a nice, crisp, clean Pilsner beer, um, in all you know, in all senses of the word, the rose is the rose, right? but it's different, and it's its own unique thing because of what you brewed it with. It still has this opportunity to showcase all those different things. Like, that's a conversation you and I have had a bunch, and
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit further down the road. But just to touch on it a little bit, Pilsner malt for so many folks out there is just considered, oh, that's just super light, clean, basic malt. That it shouldn't hardly have any kind of influence or whatnot, because it's just super lightly kilned.
Mhm.
pale, clean, clear malt. But in my mind, because you're not kilning it so high, um, it really should be the kind of malt that represents, where it was grown and what the variety of of grain it was and what that crop year was and all those things shining through. So again, when you have that Pilsner beer up there, or that clean lager beer up there, um, it has all the hallmarks of a tried and true lager beer, but you take that sip and it's something in and of itself, really remarkable, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think you can see that practically, in practical effect with some of our loggers, and then some of the stuff you guys have done with cohesion as well in town. So it's not just like some idea. It's like
Totally.
there's practical reality to this. But I did you talking about music. I have to bring this up just to
Yeah,
sneak it in because it will kind of
yeah.
tie back to Tim and I's conversation too, so we can interweave these as much as possible. But I don't know if many people listening will know of your DJ prowess, but we talked, and just music in general. I mean, you
Yeah.
are a fount of knowledge for music that is kind of mind-boggling. I've met a few people in my life like that, um, which is so impressive to me. And one thing that we talked about, it was kind of the importance of curation,
Yeah.
and like kind of what that means. But I just wanted to touch on that for a minute because I know it's just
No,
so important to both of our lives. So.
totally. No, I mean, the thing is that it's just the veracity of my appetite, right? And I know that that's something that
Mhm,
we both share. It's not
mhm,
like it's not defined by one particular genre or style or whatnot. It's just feasting for,
totally.
something, not even necessarily something new all the time. Like that's definitely there, but like finding all those threads and where that leads back to, like I think
Hmm.
it's such a clear memory for me, as clear as seeing Mr. Rogers go to the crayon factory. Like the next clearest memory for me is like sitting in the little spinny like office chair in my living room, going through my dad's records, listening to like um Grieg in the Hall of the Mountain King, or
Yeah.
Santana Abraxas or Ramsey Lewis, Pendu Ni Pomoha, like my dad had a really you know, uh, wide palette as far as what he drew from and what I got to grow up on, and so that just always was so hungry for me. But I just spin around in that chair for hours, like while the record spun at the same time. I thought maybe if I could recreate the RPMs just perfectly, like I could sync it up and I'd find transcendence, and I mean I'm not convinced I didn't. So prove me wrong. But as far as like curation goes, you know, I think it speaks perfectly to the same thing that we were just on, that idea of finding that something that's really unique but familiar. Like, my experience
Yeah.
DJing in various venues, I do all records. I've only done any kind of digital DJing when I've like been hired to do weddings or things like that, just because I know it's somebody's special day. I'm not trying to, you know, ruin their day by not having the 18-minute disco remix of the chicken dance on vinyl. If that's what grandma needs, then I'm gonna have to dig that up. But I'm also not gonna go on Discogs and buy the 18-minute Barry Levine extended chicken dance remix. I mean,
uh,
I probably should at this point, but my point being, I I do carefully curate what I bring, but I also always make sure I bring enough to have I can go in so many different directions, right? I definitely bring too much, on purpose, so that if I end up going down a rabbit hole and where that leads me, I know I can do that with confidence, no matter where that takes me. But the whole what I'm after is it's that sharing. You hear something that you're so excited about. It's not about like, oh, it's not about holding a song over somebody. Oh, I have this super obscure thing that you don't have, and I'm going to play it now. and I'm not trying to puzzle everybody. I'm trying to share things that I'm so passionate about and I'm so excited about, and then to
Yeah,
string them together
exactly.
in such a way that it creates this sense of narrative, um, or if not at least narrative, a sense of like you know adventure, in a way that makes sense. But it's like some of that involves dropping in familiar favorites here or there, like making sure you've got a Prince joint to to throw in there that everybody's going to be happy with, or like you got to have some Earth, Wind, and Fire in the mix because somebody nobody's going to be mad about that. But then to be able to
Mhm.
stretch out and do like, a mandrill song after that, like unexpected, rock funk kind of thing that everyone's like, oh, what's this now? Like, um, yeah, it's about that enthusiasm, but also just that sense of adventure, trying to find a new discovery, and I love, where that takes me with it. Like I literally dreamt last night about being at a record store and haggling about, this record that I wanted. And the guy working behind the counter, like he he didn't know that they had that record in the shop. He's like, oh, I didn't even know we had this. Oh wait, the record's not in the sleeve, but he was totally trying to pull a fast one on me. Um he just didn't want to sell me the record. And it also turned out to be Mike Watt, which I don't even know what that's all about. But we don't have to go down the that dirty dirt road to my crazy dreams. But just being in as much of it, it's something so burned onto my psyche that um I do think carries through to that. You know, I still want. I'm trying to put together um things in the malt house or in a grist bill in the exact same way that it's about leading itself into a new discovery and creating a sense of adventure. You know,
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And you can kind of use like the more familiar touch points to introduce more obscure things to people and even like ingredient wise too, you know. I know I've
totally.
done that over the years with like different adjunct things where it's like, yeah, okay, well, sure, maybe we can do some lime in this beer, but I'm going to sneak in some kelp powder in there too, so I can ease you into some really wild stuff. Um,
Absolutely.
well, we're going to take a short break for this message and then come right back for more of this conversation with Chris Schooley, Troubadour Malting.
Did you know that lemon myrtle actually has more lemon aromatics than lemons? Rich aromas, delicious flavors, and bright colors. This is what First Tea's herbs and botanicals can infuse into craft beers. Email info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA.com to learn more about using a wide range of herbs and botanicals.
For more than a decade, the Beer Law Center has been dedicated to the craft beverage industry, meeting the legal needs of breweries, wineries, distilleries, and all manner of alcohol producers and sellers around the country. From company formation to federal and state licensing, trademarks, regulations, and compliance, or if you're buying or selling an alcohol business, the Beer Law Center should be your first call. The firm never charges for an initial consultation, and if they can't help you, they'll help you find someone that can. Have a legal question? Contact the Beer Law Center on social media at Beer Law Center and online at beerlawcenter.com.
Malteurop Malting Company is based in North America, specializing in growing and producing quality malts for the craft beer and distilling industries. With local farms and malt houses spread across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, MMC's commitment to excellence is fully ingrained into every batch it produces, ensuring breweries and distilleries of any size can create the finest beverages on the planet. Visit malteuropemaltingco.com to learn how Malt Europe can support your malting needs. Or you can contact them at customer success at malteurope.com or call 844-546-MALT for questions or to place your order. Malt Europe, premium grains from field to flavor.
Welcome back. Let's keep rocking and maybe shift just a little bit into, I don't know if you want to do this. I had a note that we could potentially just cover like kind of some malt specifics, high level stuff. I feel like most brewers are going to be well aware of this. Um, I feel maybe it couldn't hurt to cover it more. Do you want to dive into this stuff and kind of what you think brewers should be looking for and or what you're looking for? I'm
Yeah,
thinking
man.
stuff like like amylase, fan, beta glucan, protein, that kind of stuff.
Totally. No, I love that you had put this out there that you wanted to cover some more of the spec thing and not to, you know, um, be all Wizard of Oz, don't peek behind the curtain with it. But
Hmm.
one thing I do want to say at the front is like so much of what has been taught about a COA has been based on um, brewing at such a high volume too, right? Where you have zero margin of error, where that spec has to be much more finite than
Hmm.
what it might need to be if you're on a 10-barrel brew house, let's say, um, or something different than 200 plus barrels at a time, needing to meet this spec indirectly, to that point of you know and I know it's something you and I have talked about in the past before too, but one of the things that got me excited about malting, or one of the things I thought I could bring over from coffee into the malt kind of universe, was the idea of freshness. This is an organic material.
Hmm.
This is not, some completely shelf stabilized thing. It is largely sugar. Um, and so in that aspect, you're still gonna, even if it's a base malt that's sat around for over a year, like more or less that sugar is going to be there,
Hmm.
depending on how it's stored and things like that. And there's all other kinds of impacts that can impact it otherwise. But but really, freshness wasn't anything that I was seeing um, kind of spoken about, in regards to malts and brewing. Um,
Yeah, I
that and
still don't ever hear
yeah,
that. So,
and from the craft malt perspective, the small batch, we're turning new batches every week, and honestly, like a lot of our product doesn't last more than 3 months in the malt house. That's kind of dictated by just our scale and whatnot, but still, like one of our advantages, or one of the advantages I see for craft malt, is being able to deliver a hyper fresh product. To tie it back to the question at hand, which was the COA and the spec sheet, um,
mhm.
digging into why freshness isn't spoken about. Um, uh, the only thing I could really find was some papers written by Charles Bamforth back in the late 70s, research that he had done for Anheuser-Busch, I believe it was at the time. And,
Mhm.
kind of saying, that malt needs to rest for 30, 60 to 90 days after malting before you use it in the brew house, or it could lead to problems in lautering, and whatnot, lead to some direct impacts to performance, again, to the brew house at a super large scale. um, but we also have to take into account at that juncture that the maltings are also done at a super large scale in that regard, and that when you're
Right.
malting a football field's worth of grain at a time, 500,000 pounds or whatnot of base malt, and kilning that all down to under 5% moisture, it's going to
Mhm.
take 30, 60 to 90 days to equilibrate that moisture content for it to behave all the way across that kind of volume, you know?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
just like anything with craft brewing, doing things at scale, at a much smaller scale, you have a lot more agility with certain things, and in the malt house, malting 5 tons, 10 tons at a time in the equipment that we have nowadays, we have that ability to get that equilibrium and moisture content, immediately out of the kiln, to the point that we've taken malt right out of the kiln, Pilsner malt, right out of the kiln, and brewed it on a 200 barrel system the very next day. and had zero impact on the lautering times. So
Yeah.
all of that is to say that, you know, I'm not saying these numbers aren't real or that they're not things to not pay attention to, but we also have to start asking that question. We have to start sprinkling that grain of salt on all of this, which is like scalability and what does that mean and how does that really impact things. We could talk about S over T in particular. Um,
Mhm.
we had a crop of higher protein. Well, I would say in general. So we malt all Lima grain Genie barley here in Colorado. We were the first to contract it um, commercially outside of Lima grain's seed expansion that they did before we contracted in the acreage.
Mhm.
um, so we've done we did malt Scarlet variety barley out of the gate. Um, but we've been primarily Genie barley the whole time. We've worked together.
Yep.
And Genie barley generally tends to come in at 12 to 14 percent protein out of the field. We definitely have some fields, and depending on water that year and the intensity of heat towards the end of the season and the stress that it puts on the barley in the field, we've definitely had 9% protein barley with Genie barley. That's not to say that it's always that way, but it does tend to run a little bit higher. Whereas the COA, and if you Googled it tomorrow or this very second, oh, what should I look for protein on a COA? It would tell you, you don't want you would never take over 12% protein barley
Right.
at all.
Right.
But because of our process and because of our scale, and because we're at the size where we can adjust our process a lot to meet, the demands of that crop out of the field, and that since we're not malting 500,000 pounds at a time, we're just malting 10,000 pounds, we can make adjustments to our process, really effective adjustments to our process to break down that protein more efficiently. So you still see an S over T ratio, up over 30, where you're going to get a nice, clean, clear beer. That said,
Yeah.
we've had um, we've had some years where the protein just takes that much more work to break down. And so consistently we had some Pilsner malt that was, closer to a 28% S over T, which would fall under what you're taught is an acceptable range for S over
Sure.
T in order to have crystal clear beers. But so I had this conversation explicitly with Jeff Biggert, who teaches, who's the head of the Ramskeller Brewery at Colorado State University, and is part of the fermentation sciences program there at that
Mhm.
school, and teaches the COA to all of those FST students. And he was developing a Czech style um, lager beer, and he wanted to use our malt. And you're going over the COA, and he's like, "Hey, but this SO4T isn't where we want it. There's no way this is going to be a clear beer." But I took him to 3 different breweries in town that had used that malt to make Pilsner beers that were crystal clear. So
Yeah.
again,
Crystal
I'm not
clear
trying to
with insane foam stability.
with insane foam stuff exactly.
Yeah.
But no, so it's one of those things of like, um, I'm not here to tell you that these numbers aren't important, but rather that the conversation around the numbers with your malt house are the things
Yeah.
that's important. And again, that's
Well,
just another layer of why working with your suppliers in a much more intimate, closer setting just gives you that ability to be able to work through some of these challenges, or to also understand that maybe they're not the challenges you thought they were in the first place.
that's so true, man. And I think a lot about how so much of it is about having a conversation. I mean, we've talked about that a lot, and it's been so crucial for our relationship, at least as far as like business side of things or whatever. It's been so beneficial to be able to have that back and forth. I mean, it's huge. Been able to do things we never would have been able to do otherwise.
Totally.
So it's yeah, it's just, I think that's a piece that can't be underestimated, you know. And I mean, some of the benefits of those things, to kind of tie it back into the earlier conversation too, and expand on that now, is like some of the projects we've been able to do together, but also just Troubadour, in general. I don't know if you want to talk about a few of those things, or I mean, we could talk about Truth Malt, of course, which
Yeah.
feels very self-serving, but hey, why not?
No, man. I mean, I think I. I mean, absolutely, it's self-serving to a degree, but I think it's one of the things that makes it a super fun conversation to have, because I think it's something, again, like, we've mentioned a number of times the advantages of being able to work closely with your suppliers, over and over again in this conversation.
Yeah.
And obviously that's the theme of the whole thing. But, I would say I'd be remiss to not say that, like, out of the gate, Steve and I, when we were conceptualizing Troubadour and what we wanted to do and which malts we wanted to make in the first place, we weren't just interested in making, piles and piles of two-row base pale malt. We, out of the gate, purposely made malts that were, again, curated like the record crates in such a way that's like, hey, this is familiar but a
Hmm.
little bit different. What is this? I'm excited. But what record is that off of? That's we did that on purpose. One, because I mean, our our goal from day one is to be a specialized malt house. We're not trying to win the volume game to make as much craft malt as possible or malt as possible or whatever. We're trying to make really special, unique malts. As we grow, and even as we're able to make more malts, we're still really focused on adding new malts to that lineup, or new processes to that lineup, and the ability to do that, because we feel like that's really where our opportunity is, and what brewers such as yourself are looking for is just, a bigger crayon box to play with. Um, and along those lines, like, out of the gate, we really thought that customization would be a much more, or a much bigger part of our business. That was kind of one of our big ideas. It's like, oh, we'll be like field specific, or we'll super specialize, specify like each of these malts in this way, or we'll, you know, make more kind of customized base malts for folks and whatnot. But I think it was just the access to that is just still so new to people, even though now there's over 60 craft malt houses throughout North America, and award-winning, amazing craft malt houses everywhere. I think it still seems, you know, out of reach for folks to to reach out to their maltster and have that conversation of, hey, what if we work together and make something that's special just for us, you know?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I love that, like, that was one of the first conversations we had, and it at that time, the volume that we were doing, both of us together, it didn't totally make sense to make a 100% just true base malt, but it was definitely something that we had the eyes on from the
Yeah.
get-go. And once we got up to that point, we had already had multiple conversations about what that might look like, and whatnot. But that opportunity to make a custom base malt for, I mean, how many barrels a year is True producing? It's
About 2,000.
Yeah. I mean, for a 2,000 barrel a year brewery to be able to have to lay stake to say, oh, I have this base malt that nobody else has. I feel like that's super remarkable. And I think that there's lots of ample opportunity for that beyond that, because, you know, I think the conversation we had about to get away from just the idea of doing it in the first place, I think it was, okay, what is the challenge of that? Like, we're trying to make
Hmm.
something custom that is going to taste really special and unique, but also is going to be able to be universal enough to be able to use across a plethora of styles, um,
Yeah,
and still stand on
exactly.
its own. And so that's
Yeah.
that's definitely a unique challenge if your idea of, base malt is, plain malt. Like, how much more plain can you make a malt? Where
Right.
I want to give you, kudos for your creativity in that, and not just your creativity, but your desire for that, you know, basic plain malt to have to be to start off at such an evocative, flavorful place. So that allowed us a lot of room with what we could do, throughout the entirety of the process. I would,
Yeah.
not getting into the total nuts and bolts of it, because I mean, what I'll say to the audience here is, when we decided we were going to make a custom base malt for True, right away I was like, well, we have to call it the Truth because it's too perfect. It's it's too on the nose. But because it's so on the nose, Zach and I both promised that we would never like really tell anybody exactly what we did to make it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we
Which I also want to just interject. Brewers have asked me over, if it's a blend of malts. I just want to make it clear that this is something that we built from the ground up with very specific things in mind. That it that and that's such a special thing to be able to do. I'm very grateful to to be able to work with you, Chris, and to be able to do that. I mean, it's just to be able to like uh, design a base malt with you is like it's a dream for any brewer, I would think, to be able to do that.
Well, and likewise, 1 billion%. I mean, like I said, it was what our goal from the get go was to be able to do something like this, to be able to offer this to brewers. I think is just it's so rewarding all the way around. Um, but yeah, I mean, the thing I'll add to it without getting into too many nuts and bolts to reveal its secrets is just that I would say its ultimate feature is that it's dynamic and that it is
Hmm.
ever changing to a degree in as much as the barley itself changes as we change to new crop years or even different parts of the bin and things like that. And that we do, take the time to make sure it's still behaving the way we want it to behave and still expressing the things we want it to express. Um, and even though we haven't seen it yet, just because we've only had so many permutations of it, since we started doing it, I imagine that there'll be a time where we see something in the barley that is maybe expressing something a little bit more than it has in the past, and but to be able to work together to say like, oh, we want to either accentuate that or incorporate it, but try to tame it down a little bit more so it still like maintains you know what it is in all these different styles of beer. But um,
Yeah,
no, it's super
exactly. And
neat.
I think I love that true beers have a certain terroir and they have a kind of like house character because of that. And I also, it represents what's going on with the crop year for, whatever year of barley that we're using. And like you say, like it's whenever we're getting into a new crop year, it's fun to assess what's going on with the malt and decide kind of where we want to land with it at that point. And I think it's fairly minor tweaks at the end of the day, but
Totally,
it is,
yeah.
it is different, So
Well, and to that point, like we have made tweaks to it
yeah,
where we, had the conversation beforehand. And it's like, oh, well, this is a really small tweak. I don't know if it will really do much, but
yeah,
we've all like witnessed, oh, it actually did do exactly the thing that we were hoping it would do. And we're talking like really the most minor of tweaks. So
hmm,
it's super cool that we have that. Like, it's not just that the equipment or the batch size or whatnot gives us that ability to do it. Ultimately, it's the nature of the collaboration itself that gives us the ability to do that, to embrace that. Hey, we're looking for this thing, and we're willing to work together to get there. Um, and so we will embrace that. Oh, let's try this and see if it gets us to that point. And that's why it's been successful for sure.
yeah, absolutely. What are a couple of other projects or malts that you want to talk about here?
I mean, I would say similarly along those lines. You know, Eric Larkin from Cohesion, who you mentioned earlier. We worked really closely with them on developing our Super Pevic, and that was a really similar collaboration because of the size of their brewery and the fact that they are kind of dictated by their size. He knew he was never going to be able to use enough to have it be an exclusive kind of uh, um,
Yeah.
an exclusive base malt just to him. But he also was like, "Oh no, that's totally cool. Let's make this, and I'm more than happy to like have it be available widely as well." And that was, that was really based on tasting through a number of different Bohemian, Czech malts to try to identify the aspects of those that we really liked, as well as like floor malting in general and what were the characteristics of floor malting that lent themselves to the end product of the beer. That really led us to a pretty, I would say, fairly experimental kind of approach to making a base malt in that there's light stewing involved in the processing of it, which does take away uh, uh, some of its efficacy, not enough to make a dramatic impact. It still like has fine extract and produces just well, but it we've added enough to it to just kind of mimic those floor malting characteristics of having almost an under modified kind of quality while still having the enzymatic package of a fully modified malt. That's super cool.
I love that particular approach because it kind of gets at this thing. I have conversations, like not all the time, but I have conversations with brewers sometimes where it's like we want to make a Czech style lager, German style lager, Belgian saison or whatever. So we're just going to ship out these malts from, Germany or Belgium or whatever. And which, nothing to take nothing away from that. It just, my mind
Yeah,
goes
world
to,
class malts.
because,
Yeah,
oh, 100%. And many of those beers are incredible. So I don't mean it like in that kind of way. It's just my mind's like, yeah, but the breweries making those beers are using the malt that's local to them. That's
right.
German lager breweries are using German malt. Like,
Totally.
so what can we do
No,
with
and
what we have?
that's a testament to Eric's idea out of the gate with Cohesion of embracing
Yep.
stylistically those beers, but still wanting to approach them in that way. It's not about is that more authentic or less authentic because it's like, well, authentic to what? It's like
Yeah.
it's 100% authentic to him and his idea that he had. So, but no, totally. I think that that point you make right there is that you can bring everything over here that you want to recreate that thing, but you're still not there. So
Right.
it's still, you can't, you're not brewing it on the freaking holodeck, like it's like, and even
Yeah.
then it would still taste like holodeck beer, which, it's kind of kinky in its own way. But uh I mean, as far as like going down along those other lines though, like
Yeah.
the thing that I wouldn't say I'm most excited about, but um, I'm most excited about it in the sense of roasting malts is the thing that really got me interested in malting in the first place. Just coming
Hmm.
from my background in coffee roasting, like for me, standing in that first time I started training on a coffee roaster and standing in front of that machine, that was like, oh my God, I'm home. This is what I want to do professionally for the rest of my life because all of it just feels right, you know? And then just
Yeah.
having done that for so many years, it's not like that feeling went away. It's just that I got more and more curious about, well, I'm just roasting one thing, and there's a number of different permutations to all of that. But I was like, well, I want to understand roasting. Like, what else do we roast that's similar to this that I can start, you know, that I can reach out to somebody and ask them about and talk to them and trying to find somebody to talk to me about roasting malts, like in the first place back then and you know late 2000s, around 2010 or so. Like
Hmm.
most of the big commercial malt houses were fairly closed up, didn't want to share a whole lot of information at that
Sure.
time. even with somebody outside of the industry. So that's where I was like, well, that seems like that's a total bottleneck. Like the roasting is the thing that I thought was the thing originally that got me really excited about the idea of malting and being able to roast, to have fresh roasted malts. Because I mean that's the kind of thing where I mean, and I think, preaching to the choir, I think you would agree that brewing
Mhm.
with fresh base malts definitely makes a difference, and you can see that difference in your beers. But I mean, when you take a fresh roasted malt and put it through your mill like right before you brew, it's a completely different, sensory experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And as brewers, we obsess so much over, degradation of ingredients and hops and oxygen pickup in the beer and with hops. But there seems to be this gap with malt. And when you're thinking specifically, like, especially with roasted malt, I'm like, you know, it, of course, roasting it sets that clock, and
Oh yeah, I mean
it's
you're
degrading.
completely obliterating the cellular structure of the thing, or at
Yeah.
the very least compromising it severely, you know. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
so to really be able to capture those compounds, that freshness is just, it's really something different, and really unique. And I think can present, you can do more with less because the ingredient itself just has so much more complexity to it. But I mean, the other aspect of that is like obviously, making 10,000 pounds of a malt at a time in the malt houses, there is a volume intensive aspect to customization there, as we've talked about, already. But with the
Mhm.
roaster, it's a 100 kilo roaster, and I could do, 3 or 4 roasts depending on the product that we're making. I could do 3 or 4 roasts a day, um, and and make 3 or 4 custom products in that one day. So that's where
Yeah.
it gets really exciting to me, because then we're really like talking about sitting down and looking at these, grist bills and recipes, and talking about what we're really trying to achieve with those flavors. And okay, like now let's put something together now in the roaster that's going to really like bring that together and do it in a way that's like completely unique to this beer. I think is something that's super, super exciting.
Yeah, and from the brewer side, being able to like time uh delivery of that stuff within a tight window and just kind of, you know, getting the maximum character from the malt in its like prime expression is just like you can't ask for more.
Yeah, and just to tie the bow on that aspect of it is, again, it's just that sense of collaboration. Like
Yeah.
that's really what I just want to, echo again and again is, it's the products that we're making in and of themselves are special and fun and whatnot, but ultimately it's the ability to do that in the first place. That's the thing that's really I want to just push as much of the enthusiasm behind as possible, because I feel like that's the true promise of what craft malt can and should be, is that spirit of collaboration between these partners in the supply chain. And that, going back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, it's about the disruption of of a completely static relationship, a static one-way relationship. It's about saying like, no, let's make this interactive, and have these conversations, and foster the spirit of collaboration and experimentation, to land at new things. And yeah, it's not for everybody. I mean, there's plenty of people who want to stand in front of the Marshall, the orange stack, with the brand name guitar, whatever, and play the big chord, and it sounds flipping amazing. Like, make no bones about it. But like, I want to believe that you and I aren't the only ones out here with this kind of spirit, and I hope what we're talking about here today like resonates with those other people out there, and hopefully they have somebody close by who's willing to really in that part of the supply chain who's willing to embrace that with them and take off on it, right?
So beautifully put, man. I mean, exactly right. I guess the last question I could have to wrap it up is, say you're a brewer out there and you're wanting to establish a relationship with a supplier, in this case, let's say a maltster. From your side of things, what do you think is a good approach to that?
I mean, I think that's a great question. Thankfully, we have the Craft Maltsters Guild, over 10 years now, together. Such an amazing group of folks. A lot of people out on the East Coast, but like representation really throughout the entirety of North America, and a number of international members as well. Um, I would definitely say encourage brewers, to at least check out the Craft Maltsters Guild website, and through there they'll find a list of craft maltsters in their area. But definitely, like, do the search, look for the craft maltster in your area. Not everybody's set up and equipped to, jump off the experimentation,
Hmm.
diving board right away, but definitely establish those. You got to start, you got to establish those relationships, and start working together and build that trust with one another. Start creating that dialogue, and that's how you're going to get there. But definitely, like, you can find a lot of us on the Craft Maltsters Guild website. Um, but also, I bet if you just, like, put Craft Maltster in your discovery page on Instagram, you'll find, a plethora. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just say, just reach out to people and find those people that kind of share the same aims and goals that you do, and see if you can figure out a way to work together. But
absolutely,
Chris,
man.
man, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for chatting with me and spending the time. It's always a joy to get to talk to you.
Hell yeah, man. No, I'm always so energized. I feel like it's always, I mean, like, obviously it's weird to just, feel like we're doing this in front of people, or at least like
Yeah,
inside of their eardrums. But I
yeah.
also feel like it's easy to kind of go off the beaten trail and just kind of get excited about some things. So no, thank you so much for asking me to do this. Like, this has been a lot of fun.
Hell yeah. Well, Chris will be back on the next episode of this show as the host, having a conversation with a brewer of his choosing. That'll be on the air in 2 weeks, so make sure you tune in for that. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media. And to support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. I'm Zach Coleman of True Brewing. Thank you for listening to the Brewer to Brewer podcast.
First Tea is your source for chamomile, hibiscus, ginger, and a whole host of herbs and botanicals. Whether you're working on a new experience or want to give your existing brews a boost, contact First Tea for the botanicals you need. Email them at info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA.com.
Ironheart Canning is the quality leader in mobile canning and much more. With a decade of packaging experience, Ironheart is your turnkey solution for all your canning needs. Are you looking for a unique can size or nitro dosing? Ironheart offers filling sizes from 6 ounce up to 19.2, dedicated equipment for mixed culture products, and nitro dosing capabilities for still beverages and beer. Looking to break into other beverage segments? Look no further. Ironheart also provides a robust network of co-packing solution to get a variety of beverages in cans, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic alike. Ironheart Canning. You have the capability because Ironheart can do it for you. Visit them at ironheartcanning.com or email info@ironheartcanning.com.
For more than a decade, the Beer Law Center has been dedicated to the craft beverage industry, meeting the legal needs of breweries, wineries, distilleries, and all manner of alcohol producers and sellers around the country. From company formation to federal and state licensing, trademarks, regulations, and compliance, or if you're buying or selling an alcohol business, the Beer Law Center should be your first call. The firm never charges for an initial consultation, and if they can't help you, they'll help you find someone that can. Have a legal question? Contact the Beer Law Center on social media @Beer Law Center and online at beerlawcenter.com.
Malt Europe Malting Company is based in North America, specializing in growing and producing quality malts for the craft beer and distilling industries. With local farms and malt houses spread across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, MMC's commitment to excellence is fully ingrained into every batch it produces, ensuring breweries and distilleries of any size can create the finest beverages on the planet. Visit malteuropemaltingco.com to learn how Malt Europe can support your malting needs. Or you can contact them at customer success at malteurope.com or call 844-546-MALT for questions or to place your order. Malt Europe, premium grains from field to flavor.